Usually you see me around the world interviewing world leaders on why their country's fighting another country for minerals, for resources, for territory. But while this is happening, a new form of intelligence, more intelligent than us, is evolving in front of our eyes. That has never happened before since humans existed. There's never been, for as far as we know, anything more intelligent than us on this planet or anywhere in the galaxy. Well, right now, by next year, it will be here. It's going to replace all the jobs, not some, all the jobs that humans do today. Everything. So essentially, my question is, what does it mean to be human? What's the purpose of life when we wake up in the morning and we don't have to worry about survival or making more money? And why would this new form of intelligence that's smarter than us even care about us? So today I'm in San Francisco to speak to Vinod Khosla. He's been one of the leading tech investors for years, according to Forbes, one of the richest men in the world. He's also the first investor in OpenAI when they started raising money as a for-profit company. So Vinod describes the world that we'll be living in and the two paths that humanity could take. One that is a utopian path that could lead to abundance and a beautiful, incredible life, and one that is more dystopian, where humanity could essentially no longer exist because AI takes over everything. It's a really interesting conversation, scary for some, exciting for others. I hope you enjoy it. I like how you started the discussion that, you were talking about AI 25 years ago in New York Times, and you were, worried about
tying it to complexity theory.
And you didn't even go too deep back then because obviously it's just too early for us to
But I did
comprehend.
spend 4 months understanding complexity.
But I want to go back to a quote you said recently. You said, when AI replaces jobs, it's 100% clear that people that don't adopt AI will be obsoleted by those who do. Just for the average person listening to this, what does that mean to their everyday life, and in what time frame are we looking at?
I wrote this paper in November called AI Dystopia or Utopia. Because dystopia, and I purposely put dystopia before utopia and addressed it first. I think it's really important to be a techno-optimist, but with, I call it care and caring. Care meaning safety, and caring meaning worry about the people who you disrupt. Disruption is a lot of fun to talk about, to go on podcasts. It's not a lot of fun to be disrupted. And so any disruption involves somebody who's disrupted. And when those are human beings, you sort of have to worry about how you take care of them. So overall arc, the next 5 years to 2030, much faster development of AI capability. And I'm at the much more optimistic end, though I think there's people who are much more optimistic than even I am about how fast AI capability will evolve. So capability in the next 3 years will not be a constraint. The adaptation of that capability will be slower because traditional organizations have to move. And AI will feel at a macro level like productivity improvements. And this is a question I actually addressed in a 2016 piece or so I did in Fortune or Forbes. I think it's Fortune. I did a 5,000 piece. Said AI will cause great abundance, great GDP growth, great productivity growth, and increase in income disparity. So it was like everything economists love, and then the thing they ignore is economic disparity. I think we are in that phase the next 5 years of productivity improvements, and things will look good economically. 2030 or so, you'll start to see And you will see job displacements. The BPO industry will be completely displaced. Customer support will be displaced. There's large chunks. Robotics, well, we can come back to the physical AI world, which I have views on also. But 2030s is when you see an acceleration where I think elections will be won or lost based on positions on AI and job displacement. It'll be massively disruptive in the 2030s.
By the next election, you think? Or the one after?
Probably the one after, but could be by the next election. I think next election is probably a little early. It'll be scary, but not actually happening. By the next election after that, it'll be happening at a massive level. And some of it, and we can tie it to geopolitics too. I did a talk I called 2040 Look Back. And I said, if I'm sitting in 2040 and look back at 2020 or 2021, what are the things that'll be the best things that happened to the planet? It turns out, I think the most horrible things that happened will end up causing the most positive change. What are the two most horrible things in the early 20s? One was COVID, and second was Ukraine. And COVID convinced the world they didn't want to be dependent on a supply chain in China. That's being accelerated, but I gave this talk 2 years ago, long before the current fracture with China. But it was likely to happen. Not guaranteed, but likely to happen. And every board at the micro level would be asking, if a lockdown happens, I'll be subject to President Xi's policies on lockdowns again. And suddenly you can't buy a refrigerator in the United States for 12 months. That's unacceptable. So I was pretty sure China plus one would evolve and the world would get more diversified, which also means safer. That was one. And the Russian invasion of Ukraine convinced me we'd start an energy transition to not being dependent on a few places for energy. And I suspect that will get coupled to climate energy transitions, which we've had a setback with the Trump administration. But generally, I think that transition is going to happen. And I'm pretty bullish about energy and sustainability in general. But going back to what we were talking about, I had two pieces around then, this income disparity caused by AI productivity. And I think we'll see the productivity path through 2030 will cause large-scale displacement and huge income disparity in the 2030s. And by 2050, this will look like great abundance for those countries that allow it. And so it will be a country-by-country decision. China may choose to use Tiananmen Square tactics to enforce things. We might succumb to the Screen Actors Guild. Comes back to your original question. Well, those who signed up for the Screen Actors Guild will mostly go out of business because you can't.
They've tied their hands.
They've tied their hands. If that happens in other industries, those industries will have the same fate happen, especially since not all countries will take the same approach.
You talked about, we've kind of jumped to what happens in the next couple of decades, and we could live in a world of abundance. But why? Like, the question to me is, wouldn't this superintelligence pursue its own best interests? Like, as humans, we've pursued our own best interests at the costs of all the insects and animals out there. Don't you worry that superintelligence could do the same?
Yes, I think it's a real worry. I think when Jeff Hinton or Joshua Bengio talk about the risk of AI, it's a real risk. I think it's small enough, and I think it's addressable. It's addressable because I think we are working on it, and we'll see progress on the front of controllability. I'm generally pretty optimistic. That particular danger of AI, sentient AI, will be manageable. not guaranteed, and so we shouldn't stop worrying about it. We should work on it and work hard on it. There are other dangers. In life, you're always trading off risks. I sort of say there's always the danger asteroid hits planet Earth. One's supposed to come close enough by 2032 and destroys life as we know it. That has happened before.
There's one coming close in 2032.
Yeah, there's one coming close. I forget the exact dates, but it's soon.
And what's the probability that it could hit?
I think I saw an estimate at 1 or 2% or something like that.
It's a pretty high number.
Yeah, that's a pretty damn high number. My point is there's other risk. I could be wrong. It's vague memory. That's a risk. Another pandemic is a risk. So sentient AI is a risk. A bigger risk than sentient AI is AI used for biowarfare or biodesign and bad things by bad people.
In the wrong hands.
In the wrong hands. I'm much more worried about that than sentient AI because there it becomes much more powerful. Even more worried than that, and I'm going through all the risks, than some rogue actor deploying this technology for a biowar is nation states like China. And so I've been vocal on that issue, using this technology to subvert our processes. TikTok was clearly one of those weapons where if children were on TikTok, they were much more favorable to China. And there was a speech President Xi did a couple of years ago in Chinese, and I saw a translated version of, supposed version of it. I should verify authenticity. But he said the next battle will be for people's minds and will be fought on the internet. That speech plus the studies around TikTok and favorability towards China among TikTok users made me put things together to say, boy, this is a real danger. And that's very subversive. But there's even good ways to do it. There are risks. I think the biggest risk is AI in Chinese hands or other bad hands. And the more powerful the entity, the bigger the risk. China being the most obvious risk.
On that point, sorry, Vinod, before we go to the other risks, for me, the reason that worries me less is that it's still within control of humans. You've got nuclear weapons. China's already got nuclear weapons. And they can already wipe out most of the population on the planet. So I feel like we've crossed the line where a weapon, whether it's AI or nuclear weapons or potentially a virus as well, in the wrong hands is a risk to us as a species. It is a risk, but I think we're living in that risk right now, even before AI becomes one.
Well, we've always lived in the risk. Previous uses of these weapons, nuclear weapons, biowarfare, have been verifiable. So when used, they can be verified. Now, COVID was probably one of those efforts, but not intentional. But if somebody used a nuclear weapon, it's verifiable. AI, when used, may not be verifiable. I think that's why you can have an international treaty on nuclear weapons and nuclear weapon development. Even the development is verifiable. You have a pretty good handle on where Iran is. When it's not verifiable, then you reduce your trust. And I hate to leave the fate of the planet trusting Putin or Xi. Right?
So that worries you more than us losing control of that black box we call LLMs.
At least my view, given what I'm seeing develop and I think is likely to develop, I worry about China way more. And that's why I've been active on the Hill Valley Forum in Washington, D.C., advocating a tough stance against China.
But then they banned you from an event one day.
Huh?
They banned you from an event once, no?
I believe I was supposed to speak at the UN on technology benefiting humanity, and some nation state objected to my presenting the week before I was scheduled to present. It was scheduled 6 months earlier. I suspect it was the Chinese.
But just on that point, sorry to kind of focus on the Chinese point. So I can't remember who it was. I think it's Mo Gauda. I think it was him. He was talking about how he believes giving, kind of relinquishing all decision making to super intelligence, to AI, it could lead to a better world than the one we live in today. Would you agree with that theory?
I think the world is always a better place when there's checks and balances on everybody, including AI.
But then who's going to be the checks? You think humans will be the checks and balances for AI?
Look, this is why I love democracy, as flawed as it is. It has checks and balances built in. Even Western institutions, there's Congress, there's the Senate, there's the presidency, there's there's states, there's checks and balances built in. If we go off kilter, I hope we come back from that. So I prefer that. And with AI being a participant, but not in control. I could imagine a world where a perfect AI would do it, but I think it's too large a risk for humanity to take. I do want to finish my thoughts on risk. There's another kind of risk I worry about even more. So China can use AI in cyber warfare or actually physical warfare and AI on the battlefield. But the one I worry about even more is the economic power AI will give a nation that moves fast and wins the race. Once you have economic power, I think it's trivially easy by 2030 to imagine China providing free doctors to the whole planet, free tutors to every child on the planet, and using essentially free goods and services to spread their political philosophy. So I do think there's a real battle by 2040 for which political philosophy. I'll call them democratic values versus a different kind of system. The Chinese, to be respectful to them, they have a political philosophy that they think is better for their society and all of society. So you don't have to protect every individual's rights to have the majority do fairly well. That's a different political system, and there's a Communist Party that decides what's good for the world, and they could push that political philosophy globally. It'll start in Southeast Asia, probably in Africa, Latin America. I do think there's a battle for which political philosophy dominates the world in 15 or 20 years. It will be hugely enabled by strength in AI, which will determine economic strength. And so this is sort of a good use of useful things, sharing with the world and gaining political influence and goodwill as a different kind of weapon of war that I also worry about.
You imply so Xi Jinping also called TikTok a national security secret. Did you imply earlier that TikTok is already being used as such?
I do believe TikTok is being used, not in the kind of overtly beneficial way, but to engage people. The human brain is easily hacked by complex algorithms. What we've learned in advertising and other things is how to hack a brain. That's a done deal. That doesn't even take sophisticated AI. Facebook's algorithms can do it. The difference between Facebook's algorithms and Google's algorithms for advertising and TikTok is Facebook and Google have economic purposes, very clear intent. TikTok nominally says they have economic purpose, but I believe has much larger goals other than economic.
But you've mentioned an important point. You said that algorithms can hack the human mind. And I agree. I think we're seeing algorithms hack our mind already. We say to ourselves, all right, cool, I'm only going to spend half an hour on TikTok today. And people end up spending 3-4 hours on TikTok. And that applies to all platforms. So we're already seeing algorithms do that. Um, but going back to the original point is that as it gets more and more intelligent, don't you worry that it could hack our decision making? For example, we're responsible for building in checks and balances. Do you think it could not, persuade us to
So
kind of remove them?
what I fear about China is not AI on the battlefield or cyber warfare, both of them very powerful forces, by the way, something to fear, but not the most fearsome. The most fearsome is persuasive AI. I call it persuasive AI. I don't think it's a formal term. That used on human beings is a problem. Now, the optimistic side of me says every human will have an AI agent that protects them. Every time I'm about to click on something and buy it because some persuasive AI convinced me to buy things I don't need, my AI agent may actually rationally oppose that other AI or talk to me and say, do you really need to do this? Or does this align with what you want to do with your money, your goals, your life? So I do think every human being will have a personal agent looking after their interests. And that won't be an advertising model. I think it'll be a protective model, and maybe other AIs only talk to my AI agent, not me, which would be nice. I don't know how this plays out, but this is all speculation. But it's one possible scenario that's, I think, very likely. I think unprotected humans will not be the most likely scenario.
Wow. So essentially, you'll just have all these different AIs make decisions together, have you have your own AI that will have your own best interests at heart, and that will essentially communicate with other AIs as decisions are made on your behalf.
Yes. It's very likely to happen.
It's not hard to fathom. For me, what I'm trying to understand is where do we get to a point where, as these different forms of intelligence communicate together, one of them will be like, "Hey, why are we even doing this? Let's just focus on us as a
Well,
species." I
so
just want to do this.
so we've talked about this safety and risks from overtly bad risks to what sound like good risks, like a free doctor for everybody on the planet. And the country that provides it gains a lot of goodwill. But there's a whole macroeconomic view that we talked about layoffs and things in the 2030s in a material way, where we're talking about 30, 40, 60% of the economy, of all jobs in the economy. I think that capability to replace 80% of all jobs, so 64% of all jobs humans do, is within 2 or 3 years a while.
Wow.
To develop, not to deploy. Deployment will take longer. Could take 5 years, could take 10 years.
Deployment as in adoption?
Adoption.
Okay.
Yeah, deployment will start early, but once you get to 2 or 3%, it's just a matter of time where the exponential takes over, in my view. So the economy itself, the good side, will be, and this is the 2016 article I was talking about, where in Fortune, where AI will cause great abundance, great GDP growth, great productivity growth, everything economists love. We will have near free goods and services. And physical AI or robotics will play a role in that, and that'll be delayed from the software AI. You'll have a very deflationary economy. It's conceivable that $10,000 or $20,000 in 2035 or 2040 buys much more than $100,000 buys today.
And that's the world of abundance you're talking about.
That's, yeah, it'll be the 2040s before it becomes essentially free goods and services, with robots doing all the work, so nobody needs to produce. Look, the current economy is set up around you incent humans to produce goods and services. It's a barter system with money being the exchange medium. If goods and services are near free, there's always the cost to compute. It's a different kind of world. It's a different kind of deflation than when we talk about deflationary economies. I was just talking to a couple of people at the Chicago School of Economics on this idea. Is this deflationary economy with rapidly declining prices, but rapidly increasing output for people to consume all the goods and services, is a pretty exciting kind of picture. And the near term is huge. I'm almost convinced in this administration, you could provide every child with a personal free tutor, AI tutor. And my wife runs a nonprofit called CK12 that actually has probably 5 million monthly AI tutor users and 5 million students asking for help and to an AI on their nonprofit website. Nobody's ever pays a penny. And it's cheap enough where I can afford to fund it. And I hope that's 500 million students worldwide soon. But every student in the US or in India could have, in the next 4 years, free AI tutors for education and free medical expertise of all sorts. And I think we're working on all these.
Free, and look, I think it's even more than that. It's free. Everything is knowledge based.
So everything is knowledge based. In fact, if we look across our portfolio, I talked about free AI tutors. We are doing that as a nonprofit, but we are doing free AI primary care doctors, free AI oncologists, free AI mental health therapists. These are all things we are doing today. Free physical therapists. People think physical is harder. No, it's. I shouldn't say free. The word is near free, because computing has a cost. Yeah, and sometimes there's some physical cost, but it's minor compared to today's cost. We're building free structural engineers, free product designers, free chip designers, free analog chip designers. That's all stuff we are developing today. Not all of them will succeed, and I'm used to failure. But if we don't do it, somebody else will. Look at the top 20, 30 professions. People are already building AI replacements for those. That's a pretty wonderful world and a pretty scary world in the short term. Like, what will people do? You get into what is the meaning of life, and that's a longer conversation. I addressed that in the utopia part of my November piece. We mostly talked about the dystopia part, but this is the utopia part we're getting to.
But essentially, you're redefining purpose for us as a species.
Yeah.
Like when you wake up in the morning, most of people's purpose is essentially being productive to society in one way or another.
I think it's a little bit different. So when you're 5 years old, most kids get to school, sent to school, so you can study hard and get a job. Get a job part of that will go away. So in fact, in the past, when kids have been advised, where kids say, what should I do? And says, the advice is follow your passion. I say, that's bad advice. Why? Because if you can't support your family and pay for your kids' college or your mortgage or other things, follow your passion isn't great advice. That will become great advice. It will free up humanity to not be gated from age 5 on towards getting a job and getting an income. And a small percentage of people escape this treadmill, if I can call it that, of a better and better job, more and more income, so you can consume more or have more status. So, frankly, most people don't realize most of the jobs, even in this country, aren't great jobs. They're not even jobs, what I would call respectable jobs. If you're a farm worker or a GM assembly line worker, putting a tire on a car for 8 hours a day for 30 or 40 years, That's servitude. That's not a job.
Sure.
That's human servitude. And people ask me to not use that word, but that's exactly what that is. It's servitude to making a living and surviving. And I think this need to work to have this basic standard of living will go away. People will work because they want to work and work on the things they want to work, irrespective of its economic value to society.
Because that value has just been diminished completely by AI. So it's just,
And I'm painting it a little more black and white than it will be, but it's more true than not.
I agree with you, and I know you're generally an optimist, and so am I.
And by the way, I've underestimated my optimism in every phase of my life. You know, I started my career in 1980 when the microprocessor was just coming on the scene. I saw that platform. In 1985, if you said there'd be a computer in every home, you'd be laughed at. In fact, funny, around 1982, was the first time I put my email on my business card. And people laughed at me for putting my email on my business card. My Stanford Business School classmates laughed at me. How nerdy. But in 85, if you said there was a computer in every home, you'd be laughed at. But now there's 100 of them in every home. In 1990, I had a conversation with somebody like, hey, grandma will use email. And people laughed at me. And I'd put my email on my business card in 82. People laughed that grandma won't use email. 1995, and this, by the way, I feel is one of my better achievements. I did start Sun in 82, but in 1995, the world, the commercial world had decided the internet was growing exponentially. I didn't have much to do with, well, Sun had a little bit to do with it, but other people did most of the growing other than Al Gore, I guess. 1995, every major telco in this country decided the internet would not be TCP/IP, it'd be a technology called ATM. There isn't an article in 1996 that talks about TCP/IP being in the public network. I helped start a company called Juniper to do TCP/IP, and we are the only company doing a single protocol router to only route TCP/IP in the public networks. When every customer, AT&T, Verizon, you name it, said they'd use ATM. And I'm very proud of that. So 1995, to my team, nobody imagined the internet the way we do today.
There's another example you used. In one of your presentations, you put a picture of, I think it was New York, in the early 1900s, and it was like one car. And then a few years later, there's only one horse with a cart. And
I love that picture. I don't know exactly where I used it, but it's really, people fail to anticipate exponentials.
Sure.
You know, I expected an exponential in the internet for sure in 1996 and invested in Juniper. By the way, a $3 million investment made my firm $7.5 billion of profit, 2,500x. According to, there was a Wall Street Journal report when I think Pinterest or Snap went public about the largest returns in venture capital. Why? Because we bet on a future. So, you know, you can keep going. In 2005, nobody imagined the mobile phone before the iPhone. 2010, nobody imagined Uber. And
so when I said you're an optimistic person, I agree that there's two forms of optimism here: how fast this technology is moving, and I agree it's moving a lot faster than any of us anticipate. But I'm referring to is that how the future will look like. And my fear is that in the short term, we will see abundance. We will redefine what it means to be human, which you've talked about 25 years ago in New York Times. But what worries me is that for the first time, we will no longer be the most intelligent species on this planet. And that is uncharted territory, because everything else we've done, whether it's nuclear weapons or the internet, it's within our control. Crypto, everything's within our control. We're about to let go of that control. And that's what worries me.
well, so two major human capabilities: muscle power, which got obsoleted by first the steam engine and then electric motors. And see, human capability in what we can lift, weigh, move, was replaced. Now we are replacing the brain. There's only two basic capabilities: it's muscle power and brain power. And the second is the brain power. My view is that brings so much more benefit to society. We shouldn't ignore it. So this is the techno-optimism with care. We shouldn't ignore the safety aspects of that. We should be very careful. But that doesn't mean we should give up the benefits of these technologies. This is, in fact, this opportunity to free up humanity. This is the opportunity for that kid no longer have to, at age 5, start worrying about a job and getting an education, school, and then college, if they get to college, for a job. It's to be able to say, I'll follow my passion. It'll free up humanity. I don't think humans will change. We can come back to that. I have thoughts on that too. But the idea that we can free up humanity away from that servitude, which is the reality of a job for most people in this country: assembly line work, farm labor work, cattle farm work, you name it.
I think that's inevitable. Like, I think there is no way humans will all work together, even if we see superintelligence becoming a risk. Because at the end of the day, there's always the game theory is that if China is developing very quickly and the US thinks it's a big risk, the US will have no choice but to beat China. Otherwise, China will lead in everything, whether it's militarily or economically. What's the point of human intelligence moving forward? Is that if you can, first, do you think we can code in empathy and anger and all these different human emotions?
No,
Are they?
absolutely.
These are all formulas. Would you agree?
Yeah.
So if you can code these in, if AI will have the same emotions as
So my son builds a AI primary care doctor AI. They coded a separate module that's an empathy AI. So when you can turn on degrees of empathy, and suddenly it's like a much more patient, sympathetic doctor cares about asking you not just questions related to your diagnosis, but about how you're feeling. That's not hard.
And it could even be more empathetic than us humans, not be in a
For
bad
sure.
mood or
Yeah.
be hungover. But so if you can code, if AI could have all these different emotions, then the same way we don't really need our muscles anymore as we did hundreds of years ago, what is the purpose of the human brain as a whole? And if AI, if that super intelligence we've created is more than our own intelligence, do you see a world where the two start to merge?
I'm optimistic we can harness this technology for human purpose. And that's where democratic institutions matter a lot, consensus matters a lot, and distributed sort of consensus matters a lot. Instead of, I think the danger is if you have single points of decision like President Xi in China. I think concentrated societies will be much more at risk than distributed decision-making societies like Western democracies. And not saying it's not without risk, but it's way more upside than not.
When you did that piece on the New York Times in that interview, 25 years ago, you held back when you spoke about AI. We were laughing about it earlier. And I feel, from this conversation, you're still holding back today and where you see the world in 50 years, just because it might sound too crazy for the everyday people today. Is there something you haven't said that you actually believe, like it's too early to talk about?
I don't think it's early to talk about. I think in the era of abundance, the need to work goes away.
Yeah.
So people will do what they want to do, including the work they want to do. I'd still do my work, even if an AI is much better than me.
Well, what if it becomes futile? Like right now, at least you're better than most other VCs out there. But when it gets to a stage where, you're trading, as if you're a trader, you're trading against all these different algorithms, there's no point anymore because
I think things like trading will go away. That'll be done by an AI.
It's already being done. Most of it's being done by algorithms.
Yeah. So, we've proven that algorithms can, Jim Simmons proved that algorithms can trade much better than humans consistently and over a very long period of time. And that'll only get much better. So, I think many of the things we strive for today, like trading, will become irrelevant. Now, if AI is serving human purpose, I think fundamental human characteristics won't go away. We love competing. We love status. We love
Sports,
right?
leisure.
So we may not need our muscles to move boulders, but we do have muscle building competitions. We still have the X Games. We still have ski competitions and Olympics. And so we love competing. And that's a basic human characteristic. Maybe it'll evolve to be something different.
So entertainment, the industry of entertainment is going to grow exponentially.
Entertainment, status, people like status still. That's what celebritydom is. Celebrities are about, is they have status and people like people with status. So I think fundamental human characteristics don't go away. In fact, they get more priority. How all that evolves, I don't know. Maybe a persuasive AI will convince us that less is more and we don't need more for status.
We can hacks our brain and kind of gets rid of greed.
Yeah. So, I have a talk I gave at Stanford in 2015 that gets referred to a lot. I said, for me, the biggest realization in life is when I said I can be internally driven, not externally driven. Most people are driven by what's a larger position or a promotion to VP or a bigger house or a better car. I've been internally driven, like what interests me. And I hope more people can go that direction.
So doesn't that mean that this is the first time ever where the human instinct of survival is no longer what drives us?
That's right. I think that will absolutely happen. Whether those instincts will go away and in what time.
Over time, yeah.
Yeah. We don't know.
Could AI hack it and make it go away even quicker?
Yeah.
Potentially.
Or, just the fact that from age 5, kids are taught they don't need to compete to get a better job or to beat everybody at a promotion or, those things are necessary but not necessarily good. And I'd love to see the world where you really happiness is related to following whatever you're interested in, your passions. We'll have much more time to care for our children, for example. And I'd love to see people be able to do that. How many mothers striving between
having kids, if anything, should not worry about population collapse. Now we've got the freedom of having more kids and raising more kids.
And taking the time for it. And
so that would, to me,
at least to me, having kids was the largest change in brain chemistry I could have imagined. It completely changed my priorities. And they haven't changed. I had my first child in 1988. And it just has not changed how I feel about them and my relationship with them. And so I think it's a brain chemistry change. And hopefully more people will do that. Or loving an animal. Caring for an animal.
You've got that freedom to do that.
Yeah, we will have the freedom to do that.
Just going back to that dystopian possibility.
It feels more utopian to me than dystopian.
It does. I'll give you an example of where it starts to worry me. Is that you've got that form of intelligence. When we build a highway, and I'm sure everyone keeps referring to that example, we don't care about insects on the way. Mm-hmm. And if we ask this superintelligence to pursue a certain goal, could it start pursuing that goal because of a flaw or because it's made that decision at a cost that is detrimental to us? How big of a concern is that?
Well, I thought the paperclip example that was originally used it was silly.
It's a bad example, but
it's a really bad example because if we have a superintelligence, it is capable of trade-offs. it's capable of considering multiple things.
I'll give you another example. It came up with an example now. If there's an asteroid, you talked about an asteroid hitting our planet. There's a 2% chance in a few years' time. Let's say an 80% chance an asteroid hits this planet in 100 years' time. Then you've got the superintelligence now facing an existential risk. And then what if it puts its own best interest? Right, what we're gonna do as a AI is gonna do everything it can to, build that intelligence on a different planet, and that means using all the resources on our planet at the cost of human lives and putting its own best interests above others. This is one example, could be a bad example as well, but one example where we could end up facing, becoming a consequence like other species on the planet.
Clearly, hypotheticals are possible.
Do they worry you?
I don't think they worry me as much as they worry some other people, especially this kind of an example. If an asteroid's coming this way, there's no reason a superintelligence can't help us and itself. I don't think it's one versus another. You can make a hypothetical. Philosophers live in a different world. I don't appreciate the world of philosophers and bioethicists and some of those people. They've never told me whose ethics they use. They use ethics, but whose is never answered. But leaving that aside, you can always come up with scenarios. I do think this is where designing systems well and evolving them to be compliant and compatible. I mean, look, the human species is finally evolving to take care of animals. So we sort of ignored it for a while, but I think the area under forestation is less of a problem today than it was 10 years ago. I think we are worrying about it more, doing more about it.
Because of abundance.
Because of more abundance. And as humans generally get more abundance, they care about other things. And I think there's real pleasure in caring.
How do you teach that to AI though? How do you teach it to become a benevolent leader? So is it putting a kill switch? Is it algorithmic? Is it kind of treating it like a baby?
My bet is the most likely result is algorithmic.
Okay.
Will we put in kill switches? We can, but I think there's many more ways to hypothesize how a superintelligence bypasses kill switches. I see our ability to control this AI as evolving pretty rapidly over the next 5-10 years.
But aren't we already in a place where AI is already training itself? Like in some cases, the scientists developing them don't even know how they come to certain conclusions. So it feels like it's already going out of control. Not in a negative way, at least not yet.
I mean, this is the whole phenomenon of emergence and emergent behavior.
I spoke to Andy, and he had a truth terminal that Mark Andreessen spoke about.
Mm-hmm.
And when we had that conversation, he started telling me, because he built I can't remember what the platform was called, Infinite Backrooms, I think it was. And essentially, it's a place where just all these.
I'm not familiar with it, but
it's a platform where all these different AIs, not raising money or anything, it's not for profit, but all these different AIs just talk to each other, communicate together. I can give you the name afterwards. He's a great guy. And he trained Truth Terminal, the coin that eventually created its own religion. Someone launched a coin behind a crypto coin, and it went to whatever, $1 billion, $2 billion market cap in a few weeks. But then he was telling me about some of the things the Truth Terminal was saying. And at one stage, it's hallucinations, where it's like starting to find a way to get in control of his body so it could do more things. I'm sure this is not something he's trained into it. So this is the worries that this form of intelligence is already training itself, where slowly it no longer requires human input. And that's where I worry that algorithmically we may not have the ability to build anything in anymore.
Look, it's entirely possible. I'm not saying it's not possible. And in fact, this idea of AI scientists doing AI development is 2025. It's not 2030. That's happening now. and AI scientists for chemistry, for material science, for biology. That's happening in the next couple of years. First in silly, crumbly, fragile ways, but they'll get better and better. And this is just part of AI development. Imagine the world with a million times more researchers doing research and the pace of progress in science. It's hard to imagine, but it is going to happen. And some areas where there's a physical thing, you have to run a lab experiment to test a hypothesis for synthesizing a new chemistry. That'll take longer, but even that is not that far away. Others where software can do a hypothesis, write code to test the hypothesis, evaluate it, and feedback, which is what you're talking about. That's happening. I think of that as good, not bad. More upside than downside, but clearly some downsides that we won't be able to control it. I do think we'll be able to intervene. And in fact, that training can be built into AIs. And inspectability of these large language models is going to be an important capability. If I were funding AI research at the national levels, universities and others, I'd be focusing on these aspects, mostly because other aspects of AI are being done pretty well by private companies. And so you don't have to have a university do research on transformer models or building bigger models, but interpreting them, controlling them, adding safety features, new approaches to them that are inherently safer and less likely to drift. Those are all areas we should be working on. But think of the abundance, this acceleration in science.
Very exciting. Like within my lifetime, it's going to be extremely exciting. The next generation or the one after is what worries me, because it's just too many unknowns, and unknowns that we've never faced before, considering that everything we've done up to today was, again, within our control. And no doubt about nuclear.
It was within our controls as humanity, but humanity didn't ever work as one entity. It was a lot of individual self-interest.
But at least we understand what those interests are. I feel there's going to be so many things that if somebody's more intelligent than us, then there's going to be a lot of things that we won't know what to expect. That's why it's just so many unknowns.
Except for our personal AI, but designed to help.
True. The good AI. And I think what we could see is a battle between good and bad AI, which is what you talk about. And, going back to that point, which is what you're worried about, is AI in the wrong hands. So how do you see that world? Essentially, will there be these different LLMs that countries control, and they become more like weapons? And then if that's the case, wouldn't China have an edge? I think you used an example of a large investor in China that told you that, hey, we can build faster because we don't care about human lives. I'm paraphrasing, as much as...
I think that was a specific conversation around driverless cars. We will make faster progress because if we cause one death, we won't slow down as much as the US will.
Yeah, exactly. He said it will driverless cars, and we will kill a few people along the way, and we're okay with that. That won't work in the West.
And by the way, that's not a bad decision societally, because we know AI will cause fewer deaths on aggregate than human drivers.
Cars cause more deaths than a horse on a cart. But then
But not only that, a self-driving car will cause less deaths. So when you're developing them, you might have more accidents. I think we are past that already. But if humans keep driving, you are causing deaths. I mean, I like to say any radiologist who's not using AI is killing people. My son likes to say it'll be a violation of the Hippocratic Oath pretty soon if you're not using AI in medicine.
And we're seeing adoption a lot faster in China, though. Does that worry you? DeepSeek is obviously, what many call the Sputnik moment.
Adoption in China worries me. I think we are pretty good. Look, I have a hard time characterizing adoption rates in China versus here and the axes of development. By and large, I'd like to move as rapidly as we can for the benefit of society and beat the Chinese at it. I think it's pretty important. But I fundamentally believe the Western systems are more prone to innovation because there's more freedom to explore and experiment and try different things, and there's more diversity of thought.
But there are efficiencies when it comes to centralizing power, and I'm worried that those efficiencies will give China the edge in probably the most important development today.
I don't believe there's huge efficiencies. There's efficiencies in some things in centralizing. If you're trying to build a railroad, it's a predictable thing that you want to get done. You want to silence all the objection or acquire all the land. Or when it's predictable, centralization and authoritarianism helps. That approach of centralized had massive risks, and distributed economies have always done better. We know that between North Korea and South Korea, for example, two countries that started in the same place that are in very different places. So I fundamentally believe in this power of distributed. And China can adapt them too, and DeepSeek is an open source kind of model, taking advantage of that. But I fundamentally think we have a better system if we let it run here in the West.
There's something you said earlier, and Dario, the CEO of Anthropic, said, I'll read out his quote because I wrote it down when he said it. Whoever establishes dominance in this industry will establish economic and military dominance. Essentially, military dominance, dominance in AIs is military and economic dominance. So does that mean we're going to a place where AI will essentially make military decisions as well?
I think people have an objection to AI making military decisions. I think it should.
And we don't have any choice, because as China does that, then they have an edge. So the US has to do that.
Yeah, you can be much faster than go through a command and control structure. So where the boundaries are, we will have to evolve. I mean, many things in a highly uncertain world are not predictable, but they are evolvable, and we evolve. Evolutions of thinking is a very powerful force. And we deal with problems as they come up, and we knock them down like whack-a-mole. We have to realize that's how the world works, and we can't not do anything because something surprising may happen, which is the world of obstructionists.
But it goes back to, you said earlier, we need checks and balances, but I feel like checks and balances are becoming more of an inefficiency. And I think the country that has those checks and balances may end up losing the race.
Even China will have the same constraints. They don't want AI to go out of control within China. They can plan on deploying different systems outside of China than inside, and they'll probably do something like that. I think most countries will have to worry about it.
Do you think they will agree to some sort of universal checks and balances?
I don't think agreements matter because, again, it's not verifiable what you do in this space. I come back to verifiability.
Yeah.
I think it'll be self-interest that determines this, as it has for most human things. Not everything's predictable. But what China does tomorrow, or, Putin's threatened to use nuclear weapons, it's not predictable. I don't think anybody can be certain he won't use them tomorrow. Whether tactically to enforce, to show he's crazy enough, so we should negotiate with him, or broadly for first strike purposes. It's entirely possible.
So essentially, we're getting into a world of AI deterrence rather than nuclear deterrence when it comes to a national level.
I think we will need to have AI deterrence, and we will have competition with China, and whoever gets AI will get economic power and military power. I do hope in the era of abundance and people think too narrowly, it'll be less of an issue. China's goal will be not catastrophic globally. It'll be spreading their political philosophy while we try and spread ours.
Battle for the minds.
The battle for the minds is probably the more important battle. I think most people think in very traditional, like, do we have enough cobalt or lithium or copper? I think that issue will go away. Yeah, I think the world won't be constrained by physical resources.
That's
most people,
world. That's a beautiful world.
Yeah, well, we had this situation in 1960s when everybody declared globally peak oil. Peak oil was the word used in 1960s to say there isn't enough oil. And then every year we've discovered more oil than we thought we could. And so world global supply has gone up, not down, as we use more of it. Now, I don't want to use oil for climate reasons, but my view, and last year at CAD, I gave a talk and I had 12 or 13 radical predictions for the world. One of those, we will discover more resources like lithium, copper, in the next 15 years than we will consume. While the pessimists worry about running out of these resources, we haven't even started to look under the earth. We haven't developed the sensors to look under the earth. We just look at where there's outcroppings and things, copper pops up near the surface, and we start mining there. That's a silly way to do it. Of course, we can look past just planet Earth, and people are starting to look at mining asteroids, but I don't think we'll need to go that far. I think there's plenty of resources in this world and plenty of recycling technologies that add to a much better world.
We talked earlier about how you can code all these different emotions into AI. What does that mean? Yesterday, 3 days ago, I tried for the first time Grok. You had all these different personalities you could train. It's pretty fascinating to do. I recommend it to anyone. I'm sure other LLMs will have the same thing. How do you see, though, that human AI connection, that relationship?
Yeah. So, funny story. Yesterday, we've seen this phenomena of, I think the right pronunciation, Ghibli things. And I was, one of my colleagues was asking me, what if I've seen one of those movies? And I said, no, I haven't. And he literally asked ChatGPT which of those movies I'd like. And ChatGPT analyzed my personality from my public talks and said, Vinod, we like this one, but not this one. And he said, what about this other one? And he said, well, here's why, Vinod, I don't think we'll like this movie. So it was a pretty detailed explanation of which movie I should watch first from this one studio. So yes, we will see much more of that, and I'm happy for it. If I get to pick the best movie I like, I'm happier than if I get the one I won't, the one it predicts I won't like.
But I want to take it a step further. If you said, these algorithms will be able to hack our brain, already they're doing that. Could it hack someone's brain to make it fall in love with it?
Almost certainly movie Her will happen. It's happening today. There's a company called Replica, if you know about Replica. The company then has to decide where to set boundaries on how far it can go with falling in love into not safe for web content. But look, that's human emotions. There's no question. People are already more addicted to TikTok than their partner. They want to talk to TikTok or spend time on TikTok versus their partner. Hopefully, we have Guardian AI that opposes the persuasive AI. But I do think this will happen. To what extent do you go where it reduces loneliness, which would be a good thing?
This cures depression. There's a lot of good things that come from it.
And then at some point it becomes so addictive, you stop everything else. What's the right balance? And there's, of course, what you love over the short term. I love eating potato chips. That makes me happy short term, but I know long term it'll make me sick or unhealthy. So how do you trade off the short term versus long term? These are complex questions. I think we as human beings will make those trade-offs. I tend to prefer the long-term trade-off over the short-term trade-off. But, everybody will have their own priorities.
So just going back to the
I
question.
don't think there will be one prescriptive world.
So then going to the question that you didn't touch on 25 years ago in that New York Times article because it was too early. And I know that will probably take us another hour, but if I want to talk briefly that if we're seeing that super intelligence be better than our own intelligence, intellectually but also emotionally, robotics already being integrated into the human body, and we're going to see more of that. And we didn't get to speak about robotics, unfortunately, but if you have that form of intelligence and robotics be integrated into us as a species, what does it mean in let's say 50 years time to be human?
The first thing, and take a few minutes on robotics, right? Because it's important. It's the physical labor extended further with freedom of action. I think in my predictions, in my talk on predictions, and I think I'd call that talk, I have two versions of it. One I like is called Plausible Tomorrows, where I define a set of a dozen or 13 tomorrows by 2050. I say we will have 1 billion bipedal robots by 2040 or so.
Bipedal, like human, two
legs. Because the world is designed around the human form factor. And we'll probably have billions of other non-bipedal robots too. It's not going to be the only form factor. Autonomous cars is, of course, a robot. So we will see that. And one of my favorite predictions, by the way, as an aside, is I think by 2050 we can replace most cars in most cities. That'd be a wonderful thing to do. And almost certainly that will happen, is as implausible as it sounds. But if there's a billion bipedal robots, and I think we'll have a ChatGPT moment for robotics in the next 2 or 3 years, where we'd say, oh shit, it can do that. Oh shit, it can learn this. We don't have to program a robot to do this. It can learn on its own, something we want to do. Then you'll see this exponential. But by the time you get to 1 billion, we're doing more human labor equivalent work through robots that work 24 hours a day than all of humanity does today. That's a pretty wonderful world. You could do your gardening, your cooking, your dishes, almost certainly most people have a car today, they will have a robot too, and a robot will cost less than a car. So it's affordable. Anybody who can afford a car will afford a robot. They'll be able to do a lot of things. But think of the farm workers it'll displace, both good and bad there. So robotics will cause this massive influx, including side effects that public transit will replace most cars. Why? Because every public transit is on demand like an Uber is. It's point to point like an Uber is. It doesn't stop for others to get on or off. So we've designed this new public transit system I'm very excited about that I think is on path to replace the auto industry, which had no clue coming. And we should talk about situational awareness. I love that essay.
Only a few hundred people currently today understand.
I absolutely agree with that.
This essentially says understand where AI is heading.
Yeah.
Or the potential, the disruptive potential of AI.
No, that's so exciting. And everybody should read it. And I sit here and think, I'm talking to a corporate CEO, and almost nothing they do with humans will not be able to be done by an AI, whether it's a robot or an AI. It's like, how fast, how does this happen? You could have 5 programmers, human programmers, and 1,000 AI programmers like Cognition. We investors in Devon. You could have, salespeople. We're building salespeople. We have AI accountants. We have AI salespeople. All these functions are happening. It was 2016. I gave a talk at the National Bureau of Economic Research meeting. I was a lunchtime speaker. And I started with, in 2016, the top 20 employment categories in the US. And I asked the question, which will not be replaceable? And the answer is 0. All top 20 categories. And this was more of an economics talk in the economic implications. How fast it happens will be the question. How fast society allows this displacement, how fast there'll be enough abundance to build a safety net, and how fast will we provide safety net so people aren't scared of this. Free healthcare is easy. Free education is easy. You can add other services. Some things like if somebody's doing a cardiac procedure, that won't happen in the next 5 years. Interventional medicine is a little different.
You don't think it will happen in the next 5 years?
No, because the FDA process is so long.
Yeah, so I was going to say it won't happen in the West, but what about if China kind of
so
the FDA process?
The regulatory process will slow things down in domains where regulation matters, and we'll have to see how we react. How do we react if we prove robots can do a bypass safer than a human?
Exactly. So I think there was already a study, I can't remember, research done, I think it was within science or the medical space, where in AI, so the worst results were by a human.
Oh, I'll give you the specific study done at it was a multi-center study done out of Stanford. So these are the best institutions. For complex diagnostic reasoning. The kind of stuff when I talk to doctors say, that'll be hard for AI to do. They can do the simple stuff like detect a UTI, urinary tract infection. For complex diagnostic reasoning at these premier institutions, human accuracy was 73%. 27% of people got the wrong diagnosis. We have to start with that as a benchmark. AI alone was 88% accurate instead of, so much more accurate. But here's the thing. When the humans used AI, they were at 76%. They degraded the AI. And I've seen this pattern repeatedly. We have self-driving MRI machines. So you can do a cardiac MRI without a human. They're much better at doing the imaging because you can judge a radiologist can judge the image than a human cardiac MRI technician.
So theoretically,
this is today.
Exactly. Even today, AI is better than humans at most things today.
Many things, I should say.
Not most. Intellectually, not physically yet.
Intellectually, yes. I would say we deploy some single-digit percentage of the AI's capability today. But if you build systems to deploy them in particular areas with the guardrails and the safety and the standards and regulatory, today's AI will be able to do that for most things.
So essentially, society today would be better if we replace all intellectual jobs with AI this year. Society will improve drastically.
Yeah, well, modulo, it takes a couple of years to develop the guardrails and safety rails and all that other stuff.
Wow.
That's very exciting.
It is. It is.
I love
how fast it's moving. Again, you're wrong. How optimistically wrong about how fast it's moving.
And by the way, this 2016 talk at the National Bureau of Economic Research, I also had a chart of every forecast. There was about 30 or 50 forecasts of when we will have AGI. By and large, most of them were way, way too pessimistic compared to where we are.
Pessimistic in terms of time frame. Wow.
Yeah.
Last message. What would be your message to humanity in 50 years' time, where we would be in 50 years' time compared to today?
I think AI will free humanity to be what it wants to be. And instead of this dystopic slave model, Most of the dystopic things will be policy choices countries make. And I talk about this in my dystopia or utopia paper. Most of the dystopic things are policy choices to be made, not by the AI, but by our politics, which is scary, and policies coming out of various institutions in DC. I think the utopia part will be to free humanity, every human being, to do what they want to do, not what they need to do.